got Tony Gentilcore on the podcast. I got into fitness via CrossFit and didn't really know much about any sort of strength and conditioning stuff previous to that. And after reading pretty much every CrossFit Journal article I could find, you start Googling around, and sooner or later you come across the cabal of online strength coaches like Tony Gentilcore and Eric Cressy, Mike Robertson, Mike Boyle, Joel Jameson, all those folks. And so I started reading a bunch of their articles as well, which I found super, super helpful to get some outside perspectives on strength and conditioning that aren't just from the CrossFit sphere. So Tony and all those other folks have actually had a pretty huge influence on my understanding of what actually matters as far as coaching. So it was awesome to actually get on the old internet and have a conversation with him. Tony is going to be in Chicago in August at South Loop Strength and Conditioning for a workshop that he puts on with his wife about the psychology of training and some negative, nasty spirals that clients can get into and how coaches can handle that, as well as some of Tony's assessment protocols and coaching tips for actual movement stuff. So should be a pretty cool workshop. We'll have links for all that stuff in the episode description on the website as well. So check that out if you are local to Chicago. I'm going to be there. It should be a fun time. But we actually get into this episode with a discussion on 90s hip hop, which is always pleasurable. I think Tony's favorite artist is A Tribe Called Quest. So we spend a bit talking about that before digging into some understanding of assessment and mobility for shoulder range of motion, which is often a problem where people want to do all kinds of crazy overhead stuff and they can't put their arms over their head, which makes that challenging, as well as some of the more nuanced psychological stuff that is really Tony's wife's expertise. But we do talk about that as well, and getting buy-in from clients and understanding where the lines are for strength coaches relative to dealing with that stuff. So good episode with Tony Gentilcore. Check it out. Check out the workshop link in the bio as well. Link in bio. That's Instagram, not podcast. What am I talking about? In episode show notes website. That's where the link is. So check that out. Enjoy it, and let me know what you think. All right, so Tony, let's talk about A Tribe Called Quest.
Oh, nice. This is a great beginning to a podcast. Yes, because everyone's just anxious to talk about 90s hip-hop. Let's do it.
Yes, exactly.
So what do you want to know about A Tribe Called Quest? My obsession with them?
Yeah, my understanding is that this is your favorite recording artist, and I would like to know why.
Well, I have vivid memories of me in the early 90s listening to Low End Theory, which is my all-time favorite rap album. I think that's many people would agree that's definitely a top 10 rap album, regardless if you're an East Coast person or a West Coast person. It's definitely a classic. And I have vivid memories of, because I grew up middle of nowhere in New York, so I didn't have cable. Internet, I believe in 1991, 92 didn't quite exist yet. I know it was there, but it wasn't there.
You probably had like Prodigy or something.
Yeah, it was something. And I didn't have a lot of access to, because I didn't have cable growing up, my grandmother had cable, however. So anytime I would like spend the night at my grandmother's house, it'd always be like, I'd sneak like MTV, little Skinamax here and there. Yep. So much doing. It was like, okay, I get to watch something other than, Channel 3 News. And, so I definitely grew up with 90s hip hop. I didn't grow up in the city, but I was definitely a hip hop fan. And my mom drove a minivan, and I remember many times when we drive to the grocery store, or I'd have to like go with her to run errands, I'd ask her if I could play a Low End Theory in the minivan. so yeah, that tape was, I probably went through at least 3 of them because I played it so often that I just all the time listened to Tribe Called Quest. And but yeah, it's even to this day I play a lot of them in my studio, and it saddens me when I'm working with a high school athlete and they're like, "Who's this?" Like, and I'm just like, "No, please." So I made many introductions to with Tribe and Nas, Mobb Deep, Wu-Tang, and I definitely feel old because now I listen to today's rap and I'm like, "Wow, this isn't music," like, wow. And kind of like what my parents used to do with me back in the early 90s. But yeah, Tribe is definitely they never get old.
So if my favorite A Tribe Called Quest album is Midnight Marauders, would you consider that to be a reasonable opinion?
We would
or
still
an
be
unreasonable
friends.
opinion?
Yes, we would
Okay,
still be
cool.
friends. Yeah. You know, it's like Midnight Marauders. I mean, I don't know if did you ever read The Source, the magazine back in the 90s, the hip hop magazine?
Yeah,
You know?
and I never subscribed to it or anything like that, and it probably would have been like confiscated if it was found in my home. But I'm pretty sure my friend Peter would have issues of it, and we would
because their Tribe's first 3 albums, like, because The Source back in the day was kind of like that was like the magazine to get your album reviewed on. And they didn't they had a mic system. So kind of like similar, we have like, you know, a 4-star system. They had a mic system, and 5 mics was considered a hip hop classic. And they didn't give that to many albums. Tribe's first 2 albums were a 5 mic album. I think Midnight Marauders came in at 4.5, but it could easily be a 5, in my opinion. And I would think most people think their weakest album was probably Love Movement, which is their 5th album. But yeah, and the one they just released on Spotify last year, it was great. So
it's not bad.
No,
better than I expected it to be.
It was considering that was like a 25-year gap or something along those lines. So not too shabby at all. So I get Tribe is still. I play a lot of Tribes, and sometimes you know, maybe much to the chagrin of some of my clients, but it's my gym, so I get to play what I want.
Yeah, you know, I got into Tribe from I think it was the Thrasher skateboarding like PlayStation game. So there was the soundtrack to that had Tribe Called Quest. It had what else was on there?
I don't know.
Like, dude, it was a bunch of like 80s and 90s hip hop like that, right? I think it had Gangstar. You know, I think it had man, I'm trying to remember what else is on there. I think the Message was on there potentially.
Yeah.
And it was one of those things where, you know, growing up, I'd listen to 106 Jams, and that had, you know, Busta Rhymes and maybe some Wu-Tang and stuff like that. So I kind of was into that stuff, but not super knowledgeable about it. And then that Thrasher soundtrack sort of like opened the doors to maybe a little bit more like a previous generation, as well as some slightly more obscure stuff. And that was definitely kind of a game changer.
Yeah, and currently, like, I'm obsessed with this podcast that someone who reads my stuff sent me a random email not too long ago, and I talked about this. I was on Mike Robertson's podcast not too long ago, and I brought this up. Someone sent me an email, and they're like, I know this might be weird. And whenever someone starts an email with that, I'm always like, okay, I'm preparing myself. Like, what's about to go down here? But they're like, I know you listen. You're a big fan of 90s hip hop. Have you ever heard about this podcast called Take It Personal Radio? And I was like, nope. And I went and checked it out, and it is the shit. It's probably been going on 6 weeks now, where pretty much every day when I'm coaching, I'm playing one of their episodes, and it's basically a tribute to 90s hip hop. And they do, I don't know how many, they probably have like 30 some odd episodes now, but every so often they do a tribute to a producer or a DJ or a group. And I mentioned they did one on DJ Premier, and it's 6 hours long.
Is it like a playlist? Is it just like their favorite Premier tracks?
It's basically a podcast, and it's like they're mixing. What's cool about them is like the DJ 360, the guy who's doing the mixes, like he'll play the songs, but then he kind of intertwines like the original song with the actual hip hop song, and and there's interludes where they're I think there's 3 or 4 of them where they're kind of talking about their favorite albums of the '90s, or if they're doing a certain tribute, whether it's Pete Rock or DJ Premier or Wu-Tang, they're talking about like their favorite Wu-Tang albums, and which is very interesting. And they have interviews where they bring on rappers, and they interview them. They just did a Redman tribute, so they brought Redman on and they interviewed him. So it's always interesting to listen to, but yeah, the mixes are legit, and it's definitely it's like, oh yeah, I remember that song, like, 'cause it's been years since I've listened to certain songs, and but it's a really good show. So if anyone listening is a 90s hip hop fan, Take It Personal Radio is where to go.
Yeah, that sounds delightful.
Do it.
Yeah, sounds like an
start with the DJ Premier tribute. It's 2 parts, and like I said, it's 6 hours long, and it's nothing but DJ Premier beats and songs. So it's Gangstar, Tribe, Nas, Biggie. It is absurdly good.
Yeah, I think that I think Premier's best stuff is the stuff on Illmatic.
Yeah,
that's my It's my opinion. I don't know if that's
And there's a
controversial or not,
part
but-
in that show where he's talking about the beat of, I think it's New York State of Mind that he did. I think, and he talks about like where he found the beat, and like when he played it, like the reaction that him and Nas had, and it's just really cool. So
that's awesome.
So that's I don't get paid or get any endorsements for pointing people to this podcast, but it's awesome. So
you use code Tony15 at checkout.
Yeah, and get I don't know, like get a free rhyme. I don't know, like. So, but yeah, it's I know many coaches my age. I think you and I might be pretty close in age. I'm in my early 40s, and I don't want to presume I know what your age, but you're in your 30s.
I'm 34. So.
Yeah. So many coaches my age you grew up with the same music. I mean, certainly there was grunge and heavy metal and stuff like that, but 90s hip hop. I mean, that was my high school and early college years. So definitely a lot of nostalgia there.
Yeah, and I think all that New York stuff. You already mentioned a bunch of the big names. That stuff is just it's kind of on a different level. I think that that hip hop sort of like coalesced into like a different genre around that time.
And I don't know, like I do feel like an old curmudgeon at times, because I feel like rap back then, there was poetry to it, and that's not to say that it isn't poetic now, but I hear the songs today that the youngins are listening to, and I'm just like, there's like the same line over and over again, whereas if you listen to a Nas song like that, he is telling a story, and it's poetic, and it's I don't know, like I just don't get it, but far be it for me, like, back now to tell people what they should like, but 90s hip hop.
Yeah. I think there's almost a different goal of like the quote unquote mumble rap stuff, right? Where it's like the point of it isn't to be lyrical or to necessarily tell a story or whatever. It's to kind of like sort of create a specific like atmosphere, and then sort of signal something about yourself through the like almost accent and dialogue and whatever.
And I can appreciate that, because I'm definitely more of a beat guy. Like there's songs that I listened to over 100 times I still don't know the lyrics to. I'm just more of a beat guy. But even like the beats, like I think 90s hip hop has a little bit more of a grittier beat to it, whereas and today there's definitely some good beats today, but I don't know. I think we just like what we like. I think everyone who in their formidable years, whether it's high school or college, think like that is the golden era of any kind of music.
Yeah, sure.
So we're no different.
I do think there's some interesting research on that I vaguely remember about, the sort of age at which you kind of like define your taste in music, and how that impacts how you perceve other music relative to that.
I have zero doubts with that. Yeah, I bet there's a ton of it out there.
Yeah. I think that people maybe don't know you so much for your opinions on 90s hip hop, but
they do now.
Yeah, they do now. But people do know you for your opinions on shoulders. So something that comes up a lot, right? I mean, I coach CrossFit athletes, own a CrossFit gym, so there's a lot of folks who are trying to put their arms over their head and do complicated stuff, and are having a potentially difficult time doing those activities. So a lot of people are concerned with finding improved shoulder range of motion, improved shoulder strength, improved shoulder muscle endurance, and they're doing a lot of weird stuff to try to get it. So what do you think are some of like the most common mistakes that people make when they're trying to improve their ability to do exercise with their arms over their head?
So number one is there's two. There's many I can think of, but the two that kind of pop up in my head is pounding a square peg into a round hole. Like I have to do this, and it's like no matter what, I'm gonna do this activity. Whether we're talking about high rep Olympic lifting or push presses or kipping pull ups or whatever. I mean, it's just the fact of the matter is there's just not a lot of people out there that have the requisite mobility to do that, to do those movements without some sort of compensation. I mean, we all compensate. I mean, no one is perfect. And in my years at Cressy Sports Performance, working a lot of overhead athletes, I have a lot of experience working with the general population as well. I try to screen for ability to bring arms overhead, shoulder flexion, overhead mobility, whatever you want to call it. And it's very rare when somebody walks in on day one and they nail it, right, without doing any sort of cranking through the lower back or there's forward head posture. And I do think we've fallen into a trap where the fix for that is always to thrash or smash or mobilize or stretch like the joint. And I feel like that is not necessarily the route to take for most people. It's not to say that isn't part of the equation, but I do find more and more often that the answer for most people is working on stability, and working on getting in better positions, and then that will equate to the ability to get your arms overhead in a cleaner fashion. So I just find that in my experience, and this is just me talking, I'm not saying like I'm correct, but I have found that we tend to be barking up the wrong branch when it comes to improving that. Where my first go-to is not to take a spike and put it in someone's pec and start thrashing around and mobilizing stuff. It's just, we could be causing more irreparable harm doing that. Because then are they going to get relief and maybe an improvement? Yeah, maybe. But we're not getting at the actual root cause of why that is limited in the first place. So I have found that if I really focus on working on more on the stability side of the equation, working on positional breathing, working on core stability, that building that proximal stability, getting stuff to work in the core yields distal mobility. And again, this is not for me to say that I don't have people form all their lats or I don't do any self-myofascial release stuff. I do. I just don't hammer that point home over and over and over again, because I do think we're kind of missing the boat with working on stability a little bit more with our clients. So that might be where I differentiate compared to a lot of coaches out there, especially in the CrossFit world. And I'm friends with many CrossFit gyms. I've trained in many CrossFit gyms. I've presented in many CrossFit gyms, and when I go through overhead mobility and kind of like my approach to addressing it, whether it's working on release tactics that aren't quite so aggressive, or working on a positional breathing drill, or working on anterior core stability, and I can see improvements, and I show people, it's like, look at that. Like without yanking on anything, we got them more shoulder range of motion just by having them do some positional breathing. And to me, like if I can hammer that point home and be like, and not have to yank on people's shoulders, so to speak, to me, that's a win-win. So I know that was kind of like a long ranty answer, but hopefully that made sense.
Yeah. So, I mean, essentially what you're saying is that a lot of people are going to present with difficulty putting their arms over their head, like we talked about, and that a lot of people's first impulse is, oh, well, that means that I'm tight. So that means I need to either stretch or do some crazy band drill or just start poking and prodding myself everywhere with lacrosse balls. And that can potentially give you some increased shoulder range of motion, but that there's likely a reason that you have that restriction in the first place. That tightness is potentially, your body trying to protect you from doing something that you shouldn't be doing. And there's maybe some other ways to get your body to release that range of motion, other than just sort of brute forcing it into allowing you into that range.
I find another good analogy that I've used in the past is kind of like the brain's kind of putting on the emergency brake, because like you said, it doesn't want you to hurt yourself. Like, yeah, you want to be able to do snatches with a barbell, but your brain's like, no, we don't have that range. We don't have control of that range of motion. We don't want you to go there. And if you're just going to crank through it anyways, you're not doing yourself any favors, and that's where people tend to get hurt. But if I can do like a simple breathing drill or anterior core and give you more stability, and then get an improvement up there, the brain kind of turns off that emergency brake, because now we're stable in areas where you're not stable. To me, that's kind of like the avenue I tend to go towards when I'm looking at overhead mobility. is looking at that first. And then, and if all this stuff doesn't work, eventually, I'm going to be like, okay, well, let's look at your lats. Maybe your lats are just jacked, which is the case for a lot of people. I mean, most people never really don't pay a lot of attention to their lats. And if you got really tight or stiff lats, I mean, you're basically working against your anatomy to get your arms overhead. Because if you think about what your lats do, they extend the humerus, they adduct the humerus, and they internally rotate the humerus. And in order to get overhead, you have to do the exact opposite of all of those things. So if your lats are jacked up or tight or stiff, and you're not addressing them, then you're gonna have some issues. So and a foam roller works fine. Like I don't feel, everyone thinks that it has to hurt in order to be effective. When that's why I made a joke of like putting a spike in your pack. Like it's like we've gone from foam rollers to foam rollers with bumps, to lacrosse balls, to lacrosse balls that have spikes on them, to now people are taking like steel and putting them in there. It's like, man, it's like, what's next? Like, what are we gonna? We're gonna get a chainsaw. And we're gonna do that. Like, so I do think. Let's pump the brakes a little bit, and let's, and that's kind of where I come in. And just say, hey, let's foam roll the lats, and let's actually like foam roll your lat and not your rib cage. And sometimes people just roll the wrong area. So if I can show them improvement there, then I'm like, okay, your warm up is that, and then we're gonna go do some overhead stuff to try to cement it. So
Yeah. It's like, it's like a hot new mobility tip, like find an abandoned construction site and like get some rusty rebar and just lay on it. You're like,
there you go. Problem solved. And again, this isn't, to me, I know we're kind of saying it in jest, but this isn't me trying to say there is no validity in doing some of those more aggressive drills. However, I think those should be a last resort, and not the go-to. So I just think there's more simple, less invasive things that people can be doing to improve that overhead mobility.
Yeah, and if we think about it, right, I mean, there's potentially, like you said, a space for a lot of different types of activities, right? So if we're trying to potentially improve stability, improve motor control, which may reduce some of that protective tension, that should maybe be the predominant activity, but that doesn't mean that there also isn't potentially a space for some more aggressive methods to give you a little bit more access to range of motion, or potentially calm something down that's highly, tense or whatever, to give you a little bit more room to do some of the drills you're trying to do.
Yeah.
But if we think about that from like an assessment perspective, I mean, you mentioned a few things, but there's some more detailed assessments that a coach can take someone through. But what if someone is just kind of like on their own trying to think about, okay, what do I need to do? What are maybe some cues or clues, more accurately, of what they should potentially be working on if they're having a hard time getting their arms over their head?
So to me, the go-to would be, number one, maybe they do need to do some simple releasing drills of their lats, maybe in their T-spine as well. I think, I spend some time in the workshops that I teach, like showing people like, what a real thoracic extension on the foam roller looks like. Because I mean, you watch most people roll on their back and going into extension where they're kind of arching their back a little bit. It's like the T, and you see like this big, like it looks like the St. Louis arch. And I'm like, that is not T-spine extension. That's your lower back. So when even just going to the point, like showing people like how, like what real thoracic extension should look like. Cause it is, I mean, it's more than, there is movement there, but it's not that much movement. So just showing someone how to do that properly can be a game changer. But then just again, like I'm a big fan of doing some positional breathing drills, and I understand that is a very, very deep rabbit hole to go down as far as once we start talking about PRI stuff or Posture Restoration Institute and positional breathing drills. Like I think something as simple as like a dead bug with a full accentuated exhale is a perfect positional breathing drill for most people, because it gets all that expiratory reserve out, which means they have to turn their abs on to get the rib cage down, and then that is owning a neutral position, and then we work on mobility there. And honestly, like most people are really shitty breathers, and like they don't know how to exhale. So just teaching somebody how to do that properly, like just a simple dead bug, is gonna reap a lot of awards. So even just those handful of things I just suggested there would be some of my go-tos.
Yeah, and I think that I wanted to circle back to the idea of the people just like arching the shit out of their back trying to do thoracic extension, which I think I've thought about that also with relationship to like hip flexor stretching, right, where people are trying to do like a couch stretch or a hip flexor stretch against the wall and just arching their back like crazy. And it can be kind of frustrating as a coach because you're like, no, you're doing it wrong. But what I've sort of thought about is that I think a lot of those folks who are trying to do those drills have whatever motor control problem relative to either extending their back or extending their hip in the first place, which is why they're doing the drill. So based upon the fact that they have this motor control problem, they do the drill wrong.
Yep.
Which is like sort of a tricky thing to solve. So it's like, okay, well, you don't know how to do it, so we need you to do this drill, but you don't know how to do it, so you can't do the drill.
Yeah.
Well, how do you unravel that?
So the hip flexor one's actually a very good example because I mean, how many times do you have somebody come in saying my hips are really tight, and they point to like an exact spot on the front of their hip that's like it's like right there, it's tight, and then what do? You ask them, okay, show me what you're doing to address that, and they'll show you exactly what you just said, like this aggressive stretch where they're in a half kneeling position on the ground, and then they kind of glide their body forward to the point where their lower back is really arched, and you ask them where they feel that stretch, and they point to that exact area. But I'm like, well, you're not stretching your hip flexors there. You're stretching your lower back, but you're also jamming your femoral head forward. And that is that sensation you feel is because it's not in a proper position. And so you're actually creating more instability there, which kind of feeds the issue. So I did a popular video, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago called a bull hip flexor stretch versus a real hip flexor stretch. And it's like a 2-minute video, and I show the bullshit hip flexor stretch exactly how I just described it. And then I describe a real hip flexor stretch where I was like, okay, now we're going to get somebody in a real half kneeling position where their pelvis is not excessively anteriorly tilted, that we see belt buckle the chin. So like their pelvis isn't going to spill any water, so they get underneath their pelvis a little bit more. And then I squeeze their glute, and they come forward maybe an inch, and it's like, whoa! Now they feel a hip flexor stretch. So because we're kind of nudging them into a little bit more posterior tilt. So getting just people to feel where the stretch actually, what it should actually feel like, and that more range of motion does not necessarily make it better. It is an important coaching point to go over with people. So once you teach that, then they kind of understand like, oh, positions matter. Like what positions I put my body in actually make a difference. I'm like, yeah, you want to be in the correct position, because then if you can't do it here, there's no way in hell you're going to do it with a squat or a deadlift or a clean, and there's no way in hell you're going to do it under fatigue. So we need to build context here so you can do it when you're actually doing some cool stuff on the gym floor.
And how do you get people to understand enough about the drills that you're having them do such that they can properly execute it on their own? Because I mean, you mentioned something with, you're starting to talk about PRI.
Sure.
And, I've had some experiences probably similar to yours where maybe you give some people some highly complex PRI drill where it's like, all right, this needs to be twisted just here. Make sure you don't feel it here. If you feel this, you're doing it wrong. Breathe here, expand this part of your rib cage. And cool, does that make sense? And they're kind of like, I don't know. And then it's like, actually just do a dead bug on your own. You're going to be okay. Yeah. That's probably going to be a better option. So how do you equip people with an understanding of what they should be doing and shouldn't be doing and avoid unnecessary complexity when they're doing things on their own?
So that's part of the psychology of what we do is building competency with our clients, because competency basically just means people don't want to feel stupid when they're doing stuff. And if you give them complex stuff that they can't do and they don't understand it, they're going to feel stupid. And then the likelihood they're going to continue doing it is pretty much zero. So going into the PRI example again, there are, I don't know, hundreds of drills that can be done as far as like their philosophy and their methodology and what they do as far as getting the body into a better position. When I was at Cressy Sports Performance, and I feel like us and other facilities such as IFAST, which is out in Indianapolis, and that's Mike Robertson, Bill Hartman. So we're talking circa 2009, 2010. a few of our coaches went to the courses and we started implementing it with our athletes. I feel like we were some of the early adopters, at least in the strength and conditioning world, of the PRI stuff. I mean, that PRI has been around for over 20 years. I mean, it's only been within the past 5, 6, 7 years that, you know, stupid meatheads have gotten a hold of it and brought it to their world. But, you know, when I was at Cressy Sports Performance, it was, we latched on to maybe 4 or 5 drills that we felt had a universal carryover to a lot of the population that we worked with. And we just try to simplify it and not try to overwhelm people. Like, we're going to do 2 or 3 of these drills, 5 breaths each. Then we're going to do our warm up. Then we're going to go lift. And yeah, a dead bug to me is a positional breathing drill. A side plank breathing rep is a positional breathing drill. You know, then there's other ones at PRI where they have all these weird names. But, you know, doing a alligator breath where you lie in your stomach and rest your forehead on your forearm and do a positional breathing drill there. The important part is, as a coach, that we have to make sure that we're actually coaching our clients and making sure they're feeling it where they're supposed to feel it. Whether or not, because some clients don't give a shit about why are we doing this and why are we working. They just want to be told what to do. But certainly with the more inquisitive people, you know, I just say, listen, basically we're just trying to get you to chill out. We're you know, I don't know about you, Todd, but I work with a lot of type A individuals who come in like, I want you to murder me today. And I'm like, and that's fine. Like, I can appreciate that they want to work hard that day. But I also know that a lot of what puts us in a bad position in the first place is stress and the positions that we're in. So a lot of the advantage of these drills is to get people more parasympathetic and just get them to chill out a little bit and get them in a better position, and then we go train. So if I just frame it that way, they kind of like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And it isn't labor. It isn't laborious. Like, we're talking maybe 2 minutes, if that. You know, it's not a big chunk of the training session. Because believe me, I do feel one of the pitfalls of all this stuff in the past few years is there are a lot of trainers and coaches who are now doing really shitty physical therapy. And gotten way overboard with corrective exercise to the point where now people are spending half of their session breathing into balloons and breathing into straws and getting in these weird precarious positions. And then they have like 20 minutes to go do stuff. It's like, no, we need to get on the gym floor and train. Like, let's not forget that we're supposed to get people a training effect here. But if I can frame it in a way that, hey, this is just going to get you to chill out. It's going to get you in a better position. So when we go lift, you'll probably be able to lift more weight and feel better. That's as simple as we have to make it. And I've yet to come across somebody who didn't get on board with that message.
Yeah, you started to mention something I wanted to ask about, which is finding the balance between how much time and energy you should put into correctives versus like actually training. And to your point also about, you know, just strength coaches ending up doing, you know, bullshit physical therapy. I think one of the other downsides to that is giving people the sort of mindset and assumption that they're fragile, right? That it's like, if you don't do, you know, all these drills, you know, you're going to be broken, and we can't do anything other than, you know, lie on the ground and breathe and do some crawling drills. Because if we try to squat you before you have, you know, absolutely perfect motor control of your rib cage, like, you're going to destroy all your hip ligaments. And it's like, well, that's not necessarily the message we want to give people either.
I couldn't agree with that more, because I do feel that is, we're not doing any of our clients or athletes any favors with that mentality either, where it's like, yeah, I do feel there's a lot of coaches out there that they use the assessment as a way of like being nitpicky. You know, they're like, oh, your left shoulder's internally rotated, and you know, you got your hip flexors are tight, and your right eye is lower than your left, and we got to fix that. And you know, if we don't fix that, then you're not. And it's just like, man, like, let's go train, please. Like, you know, no one has walked into an assessment and no one has perfect posture. That doesn't even exist. We're asymmetrical creatures. That's fine. Let's just find. There's a coach that probably 3 years ago I heard him say this term, Chris Chase. He is now I believe he's the strength coach for the USC baseball team right now. But he used this term, and it was such a money term, trainable menu. my job is to find someone's trainable menu. Because this is not to say that I get people walking in who are beat up. Like I have to respect that. I have to take their injury history, whether it's like a history of lower back issues, or maybe their shoulder is pissed off, or their knees don't feel great, or maybe they, whatever. I have to respect that and take that into consideration. And then I have to take their ability level, and then I have to take their goals, and then find their trainable menu. Because of course I don't want to hurt them, but I want them to train. And I do think it's a powerful message to send your clients when you spend more time showing them what they can do and what they can be successful at than showing them stuff that like giving them a laundry list of correctives that's going to take them 35 minutes to do, and no one gets jazzed up to do that. So yeah, there's definitely I think there's definitely an experience that comes with that. I think it's kind of the evolution of any coach. You kind of learn as you go. Because I think we've all kind of been in the over-corrective exercise mentality. Like, we can, like you said, if you don't have perfect motor control of your rib cage, we're not going to load your squat. What do we got? We're just not going to squat people for 16 weeks. Like, come on. Like, I can have somebody do a goblet squat. They're going to be fine. So, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but I if anything, it was just to agree with exactly what you said.
Yeah, I guess something that might be interesting would be breaking down, what does a typical session look like in terms of how much time is spent on different activities, right? I mean, like how much time are you spending on, warm up? How much time are you spending on corrective exercise? How much time are you spending on like the main thrust of the session, accessory work, et cetera?
So with me, I'm a little bit in my own bubble in the sense like here in Boston, with my business model at my studio, it is more of a semi-private model where everyone has their own program. So everyone that I work with has their individual program that they're working on. And I'm basically coaching, 2 to 4 people at a time, sometimes 5, sometimes 6, but it's usually home base is like 3 or 4. And they're all, and my space is pretty small. So it's like 500 square feet. It's not, it's probably someone's living room, but, I can have my eyes on them. And I don't have to necessarily kick them out after a 60-minute window. Whereas if I was working with somebody one-on-one, of course I have to be a little bit more judicious with my time. But if I had to use like a pie chart as far as like what a typical session with my clients look like, they're going to come in, they'll do a little bit of foam rolling, not much. I'm a big fan of Accu Mobility, ACU Mobility, and using their Accu Mobility balls. And it's a company based out of here in Boston. So I'll have some of my clients do some of their drills, which are really quick and dirty and like 2 or 3 drills and we're done. And then it's like, okay, then we're going to do your warm up, which could be, maybe 5 minutes. And then the rest of the time is, we're doing our strength work. And then at the end, and that's 40, 45 minutes. And then time permitting, usually it's programmed, but if they want a little extra time, I was like, hey, we have a 5 to 10 minute window where, it might be an arm farm for some of my male clients. It could be a badonkadonk circuit for some of my female clients. Or, I have guys want to work their glutes too. So, or I'm a big fan of carries. And now that it's summer outside, I can have people do carries outside on the sidewalk. And we'll do some of that. So, I think, I remember Eric and I, my former business partner, Eric Cressy and I, when I was at CSP, we used to get a lot of people come in for assessments who were beat up. And I like to be a fly in the wall when I'm coaching somebody for the first time, especially that first session where it's like, okay, like show me your warm up. Like, what do you do? And it's like, I've never seen so many meticulous foam rolling sessions where it's like every inch of their body is like, it's like I'm surprised they didn't like put Sade on the radio, like light a candle. And it's like this like seduction of like, it's like every inch of their body. And a lot of times we were both like, listen, that's why you're always hurt. It's like you're not doing anything. You think you're like this delicate flower that can't do anything. And, it's like I'm not anti-foam rolling at all, but I'm anti-doing it for 15, 20 minutes. And but then again, there's been cases where if I'm working with somebody who's very deconditioned, they're sedentary, and sometimes foam rolling is a workout for some people. So, this isn't to say that there isn't a time and place for it, but yeah, that's more or less what a typical session looks like. It's the bulk of it is like I want them on the gym floor training and moving. So the warm up and the positional breathing stuff that it's like 10 minutes max, all that combined.
Yeah. No, that's I think that's some helpful perspective, right? Because it's like, especially online where people like to get in the weeds and discuss stuff, it can be interesting coach backroom talk to really get detailed on assessments and different scapular motor control exercises and all that stuff. It's like, yeah, that's good information. But in terms of actually applying it to what people should be doing on a daily basis, it's like, yeah, that's ancillary to the main work of training. And that, that, as you were talking, I was kind of thinking about like concepts of like sensitivity and specificity in like medical testing, right? Meaning like false positives and false negatives, like on a population level, where if you just start running, screens on an entire population, if you don't have an expectation that they may have some sort of specific disease, you just start like running blood tests, or been some issues with like mammograms or like prostate cancer screening. It's like you're going to catch a bunch of stuff that isn't actually a problem for that person. And it's not costless to start treating that, right? That you're actually wasting time potentially by doing something other than what's important to them. The treatment itself may actually have a cost in terms of, potential negative outcomes for that individual.
Yeah.
And for a lot of things like that, the negative outcome of a false positive on a population level is much higher than the potential positive of occasionally catching something that isn't, that you wouldn't catch otherwise. So that you have to be careful with how much you actually put into, trying to track down every little thing and spend a bunch of time working on it.
And even to shorten out that was brilliant. Even to shorten that up is like, don't go seeking dysfunction that's not there. Yeah. So it's just like, I think, if you're the type of coach or personal trainer who like that's your thing, it's like, okay, I'm going to prove to this person how broken they are. So hopefully they buy some sessions. Yeah. I find that doesn't work. 'Cause I mean, if you think about it, like if we're talking about like the psychology, like if you're for example, if you're a personal trainer working in a commercial gym, and I get it, I did the first 5 years of my career, that's what I did. And I learned a lot. I tell every trainer that's what they should do. But if you really want to separate yourself from the masses, part of their psychology is that initial assessment with that client. I mean, no one wants to sit there and listen to how much of a walking ball of fail they are. They don't want to be. It's not. I mean, yes, they want to be informed. Maybe if someone walks in with a lower back issue, of course you want to peel back the onion and try to see like, okay, what provocative positions like hurt, and then we're going to avoid those positions and we're going to strengthen the ones that don't hurt. I get it, but if your MO as a coach is just to like destroy people on the first day, like, and just like, you're broken, I'm the one that can fix you. You're probably not going to get a lot of. I mean, I had to learn that the hard way. It's just people are not. They're going to be like, screw that guy. Like, I don't want to work with him. Like, he's a jerk. So even just the standard of, even that initial like back and forth in the assessment can have a profound effect as far as like people actually like coming on board. Like I find like the less that I tell people. Like, yeah, I might write down in my notes like some information for me, but it's not like I'm telling them like, oh my God, you're just destroyed. Like, what are we doing? Like you got to hire me and I'm gonna buy a 48 pack and I'm gonna fix you. I don't think that ever works. So yeah.
And I think there's also an element of, even if you are trying to play that game, like what is the chance that you as someone's coach are going to actually fix that person? Like probably very low, especially with a lot of these chronic longstanding issues. Like the best you're going to do in a lot of cases is teach that person how to mitigate some of the issues that are going to come from that. Like the number of people who you're going to actually truly fix, like that's a pretty small percentage.
Yeah.
It's it's a tricky balance to find, because you want to be able to communicate to people and have an upfront assessment, but you don't want to scare them, nor do you want to start going down every rabbit hole.
I also think that's not that we have to go into this, but I mean that's what having a network of physical therapists and massage therapists are for. Like I'm a strength coach. Like I want to stay in my lane. Like I feel like I'm smarter than the average Catholic. Like I understand movement. Like I've been around. I've been doing this for 18 years. Like I've been around. Like I know that I probably know more than a lot of coaches out there. And this is not me saying like I know it all, but I also know that I want to stay in my lane. And if someone has an issue, I'm going to send him or her to one of my physical therapist friends, and they're going to deal with the more insidious corrective exercisey stuff. Like when people are with me, I want them to train. So, which honestly is going to be better for them than rest, of course. Like I hate when people are told, "Oh, I'm just going to just rest." Like that's not going to fix anything. So, I think when you have more insidious things come up, whether, it's a low back, neck, whatever, that's why we refer people out.
Yeah, for sure. We talked a few times about just some psychological issues with clients in terms of misconceptions that they may have or difficulty in getting buy-in. I mean, I think something that you talked about earlier is something I see where a lot of folks come into the gym and they just want to get absolutely destroyed. Or on the other end of that, right, you have the clients who do start to do some research on their own and start to understand a little bit about movement and movement dysfunction, et cetera. And then the clients themselves become the people who are like, oh, well, I never activate my glutes, so I need to just like only do these like silly banded walks because I can't do anything until my glutes work. And it's really difficult for people to find like the sweet spot for their own psychology surrounding training. So what do you see are some major psychological issues that you have to deal with as a coach in terms of getting clients to take proper actions?
Well, I mean, of course, as you and I were talking before we logged on, I mean, my wife, who is a psychologist, and we present together, this is her wheelhouse, and thankfully, because I am married to her, like I've learned a lot from her in the course of being with her for 10 years, and I have reshaped my approach as a coach. In one umbrella theme that I've latched on, well, two umbrella themes I've latched onto since being with her is this idea of like what's the ideal sets and reps, and what's the ideal like number of days someone should train, because you nailed it. Some people come in thinking they have to be in the gym every single day, they have to be crushing themselves, and we both know that's not true. And a lot of times I do try to pump the expectations or temper the expectations of people who walk in, because for example, like I had a kid come in for an assessment 2 weeks ago who's basically been doing nothing for 4 years. He used to be in shape, had a pretty nasty accident. I assume there's been some psychological stuff going on where I have to assume there'd be some depression there. And when you can't train, I know whenever if I can't train the way I want to train, like I get pretty sad. And of course he's coming in like gangbusters, like, oh, I want to train 6 days a week and and in my head I'm just like, no, like let's start with 3. Like let's do that and do those well and be consistent with that, and then yes, of course we're gonna be talking this through. We're gonna see how you react to that. And there's this idea of 3 by 52, where if I can get somebody coming into the gym 3 days a week, 52 weeks out of the year, like there's gonna be some good things that are gonna happen. And it's my job as a coach to find that, like, what is going to motivate somebody to do that. So I do think as coaches there is a learning of the soft skills of coaching that helps. What's the word I'm looking for? That kind of helps. It's a synergistic effect as far as of getting people in at 3 by 52 mindset, where like I am not a rah coach. Like I've never been someone who gets in people's faces and yells really loud and I'm like the rambunctious like jump on the wall type coach. That is not me. Some people react well to that. I don't know many that do. But we do need to match the exercises we prescribe and the programs we write to that of the client. So, a good example of that is, I might have a client who feels really intimidated with a back squat, like a barbell back squat. They've never been able to do it well. They've never hired a coach, but whenever they do it, it doesn't feel great. It just doesn't. Their back doesn't feel great. They've always had a hard time. But they keep reading all these articles that say the back squat's what you have to do to get strong and lose fat, and it gets you more sexual partners and like whatever. The back squat's the shit. And if someone like, it goes back to what I said earlier about building competency. Like, people don't want to feel stupid. They want to feel like they can be successful. So he's like, we're gonna goblet squat. We're gonna do landmine squats. We're gonna do 2 kb front squats. We're gonna pick variations that you can crush and do well, get the training effect that we want, and then maybe down the road we'll throw in some back squats there. But I want to elicit as much success as possible in the beginning. And I think if we can do that as coaches in doing a better job of matching, what, as far as motivation, like what's going to get people into that 3x52 mindset. I think we'll do a lot of good things. And another thing I'm a big fan of is this concept I got from my wife, this saying I got from my wife is, I'm looking for progress, not perfection. So, and I do often see people get frustrated if they don't get an exercise right the first time, or if they for some reason they couldn't make it in a session, they missed a workout that week. I've had some clients who really beat themselves up if they miss a workout in a week, which is cool. Like, I can respect that, but at the same time, like, listen, life happens. Like, sometimes work's gonna get you up, or family's gonna come in town, or your kid stayed up, is sick, you were up all night. I get it. Progress, not perfection. So as long as I'm seeing small progress week by week, month by month, whether that's actual improvement in the loads that they're using. So kind of go off on a track a little bit, like just people tracking their workouts. I mean, that could be the game changer right there. It's like, a lot of people don't track their workouts. It's like, okay, what did you do last week? I don't know. Well, what are we doing? Like, this is an amateur hour. Like, come on, like write your stuff down. Like, take some accountability here. Like, I mean, write your workouts down, so that way we can look at the previous week and look at this week. Okay, we're going to try to beat those numbers. Like, that is progress. Even how an exercise feels. Like, I've had some people stick with the same exercises for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, sometimes the same weight for a week or two, or if not 3, just to get the feel of the exercise easier. That is progress. Like, if there's less effort in doing the same load, like, that to me is progress. So we can't always view progress as like more weight, more reps, more weight, more reps, longer, harder. That it's just, at some point there's going to be a breaking point. So I know I get a little ranty, but those would be 2 examples. 3x52 and progress, not perfection, would be a nice way of using psychology to get on their side. Because you're right. I don't think there is time and place for a hard workout or a hard block of training. I get it. But to me, easy training is good training. Like, I would much rather somebody leave a session feeling like they could do more than to leave a session every single time like they could barely walk out the door. Like, that's going to happen sometimes, but it shouldn't be like every single time.
Yeah, and I think you also touched on the idea of just getting quick wins for people, which that's huge. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's so important to get people to have some sort of win so that they can fall into that progress, not perfection.
I mean, even when we're talking about pain, like, and winning, like there's a good friend of mine here in Boston who's a really good physical therapist at Champion Physical Therapy in Boston, which is Mike Reynolds' place. Dan Pope. He did a really great, and he has a CrossFit background. He actually works with a lot of CrossFit athletes, and he had a really good. He did this product called the shoulder optimization, or optimal shoulder. It was so good. I'm forgetting the name of the product, but he talked about like pain and how to, like, when you have someone with shoulder issues and pain, like what does that mean? Like, how do we manage that? And he put it in a great way. Like, there's always gonna be some tinkering of pain when you're working with somebody who's coming off of an injury. It's just a matter of, like, not being at too much. So the number he used was 3. So if on a scale of 1 to 10, like 10 being jaws just bit your arm off, and 1 being no big deal. During a workout, the pain should never get above a 3. And then the day after, it should never be above a 3. So then we get into this concept of, like, he calls it the boom or bust concept, where you hit people who they come in, oh, my shoulder feels good today, so I'm gonna do kipping pull-ups and cleans, and I'm gonna plow through it. And then what happens? Their shoulder ends up they shows them the middle finger, and then they're out for a day or two, and then they come back. My shoulder feels good again. Okay, I'm gonna bench press and do military press. So but you have to figure out, okay, what exercises don't hurt? Push-ups, rows, slow tempo, like neutral grip presses, or like let's stay there. Let's not get above a 3, and then that is progress. And then you have the other camp that undertrained. So it's like, okay, well, I don't want it to hurt at all. Like there should be no. This is that corrective exercise overboard that we went into earlier. So again, if you're undertraining people and they're not tinkering with that threshold at all, they're probably not going to see much progress over the long haul. Because then as soon as they do start to ramp it up, they're not going to be prepared for it. So, one thing that I've changed in the past year or so is just not hyperventilating into a paper bag as soon as someone says something hurts. I was like, well, okay, it hurts, but is it more than a 3? And if they say, no, not really, it's like a 2, then I'm like, okay, let's go. We're fine. But if they say it's like a 5 or a 6 or higher, then I'm like, okay, well, obviously either the exercise is too aggressive, or maybe there's too much volume in that program. There's something that I have to do as the coach to tinker. But even like stuff like that has had a profound effect, and that is psychological. And it does take a little bit of trial and error, of course. I mean, coaching is always trial and error, and even on the individual standpoint, there's trial and error there, because it is a foreign concept to some people. Like, what? I should lean into pain? What? It's like, yes, but not too much. Is it above a 3? And I think that's been a message that I've been using a lot in my presentations of late, and trainers seem to be digging it. So, it helped me, so I'm hoping it helps other people.
Yeah, that if we can think about training with some discomfort, that the overall goal is to increase the resilience
Sure.
of the individual.
Yeah.
And that, if they're training into too much pain, over time that will decrease their resilience by potentially injuring them further. But if they never experience any discomfort, or if they do have something that's uncomfortable, completely avoiding that at all times, no matter what, that over time that is potentially making them less resilient as well.
Yeah.
So there's a sweet spot.
And it reminds me of I do a fair bit of writing for T Nation, and there's a quote that I did a couple months ago where they memed it. I was memed, so it's kind of oh my god, I was memed. And I told the story of a client that I started working with last year. It was a male client, and the first like week or 2 or 3, he'd come in once a week, and it's like everything. He's like, oh, this is hard. Oh, this is hard. Like squatting, deadlifting. I mean, it got to the point where it was like we were doing like Palloff presses. Oh, this is hard. And I was just like, I just reached at first I'm like, okay, it's fine. Like, I get it. I just reached my tipping point, and I was just like, dude, lift the weights. It's not supposed to tickle. Like, and it just came out, but it wasn't being a dick. Like I didn't want to like make him feel bad, but I kind of said it in a way that was kind of like in jest, but kind of like being serious too. It was like, and I felt like I got the point across. It's like, you do need to challenge yourself here. Like it isn't gonna feel good. If there's pain, yes, that is one thing. But if you're uncomfortable, like, come on, like we can work with that. So yeah, that's always a conversation to have with some people too. It's like some people can't tell the difference between being challenging and it hurting, and that takes a little bit of education on us as coaches as well.
Yeah, and just experiences. I think some people come in without necessarily having an appropriate athletic background.
Sure.
And they can't tell the difference. Or particularly in some sports, I mean, anecdotally, I'd say like dancers and rugby players in particular are just like, everything is fine.
They grit through everything,
actually, yeah.
Like,
oh, I don't know about that.
You could see it in their face that they're wincing. It's like,
yeah,
like, dude, it hurts. No, it's fine. Like,
yeah. You're like, I don't know about that.
Like, you're bleeding out of your eyes. Something hurts.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. Like, no, we're good. It's okay. So I think that it may have been on Mike Robertson's podcast that you mentioned previously. You're talking about your wife's insight into the psychology of training and some potential pitfalls that people get into. And I think a lot of folks are searching for mindset advice and psychological advice surrounding their training and just, I mean, their lives in general. But there's a lot of sort of self-styled mindset experts on Instagram and social media kind of putting out a bunch of content about, improving your mindset, improving your grit, et cetera. What do you see as some of the potential pitfalls that people run into when they're searching for this type of content?
Well, I mean, that's kind of the pit. I mean, I think social media in general, and I'm a fan of it, don't get me wrong, but I think we all put on our rose-colored glasses on social media, and it's hard for me to go on Instagram on any given day and see like this picture of someone put up and they're like, there's a beautiful sunset and like they're ripped and they're in like their shirts off, or they're in like a bikini. It's like, oh, the mindset, like you just got to do it, and like, like and then they label themselves as a mindset coach, and I'm just like, what does that even mean? Like, and I joke because it's like my wife is a doctor of psychology, like she lifts and she can kind of speak the verbiage, and so I just think as far as mistakes, it's just like, I just think it's one of those things where it's like knowing your lane. And this isn't to say that there are smart people out there who don't have a degree in psychology who know how to talk psychology. But I just think it's just like that's kind of the pitfall of social media. It's just everyone it's becoming harder and harder to know your role, for lack of a better term, if that makes any sense. And sometimes I just don't have enough eye rolls to give. It's like when I get on social media, I'm like, oh my God, like seriously. And I keep my mouth shut. Like I am not confrontational in the slightest. But that's a big reason why I've encouraged my wife. We started presenting together, I don't know, 3 years ago. And doing our workshop together, because there is a need in the industry for somebody who has the educational background in psychology and can speak to how do we go about improving motivation with our clients, and how can we go when we do have a tricky client. Because sometimes, I've had clients bring up some pretty personal stuff in a session, and I'm just like, whoa, 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 like, and that's not my reaction, but in my head, I'm like, stop. Yeah. And it's like, how do we manage that? Like, what skills can we learn from a psychologist, not just someone who read a chapter in a book about positive thinking. But what can we learn from that? And I think we need to seek more of those individuals out who, and that's a big reason why my wife and I encourage her to start doing stuff in the industry and start presenting with me, because she can do that. So yeah, that would be my elevator pitch for coming to listen to us speak. Actually, because we're coming to Chicago, so
that's right.
This is the only time we're presenting it this year, but we've done it in Boston a few times. We've done it in Austin. We've done it in London. We've done it in Toronto. We've done it in Germany. She's going to be speaking down in Melbourne when 2 weeks, like speaking psych skills for fit pros down there. So, and she's doing more and more consulting with trainers and gym owners who might be working through their own stuff. But also they bring up tricky clients, and they might have a client who's just a negative Nancy all the time. And like, it's like everything is negative, and like, okay, how can we reframe things? What are some words we can use? What are some strategies we can use? And she has the educational background to do that. So that's all I'm saying. It's just be wary on social media when someone labels themselves a mindset coach. I'm just like, just saying positive things doesn't make you a mindset coach, So I don't know. That's just my little rant on that.
Yeah, I think there's some similarity to the conversation we were having about some like physical therapy concepts earlier, right? Where as a coach, it's potentially valuable to have a more detailed understanding of some physical therapy concepts, of rehab and all that kind of stuff. But you don't want to be saying, "Oh, I'm going to fix your back pain," or "I'm going to fix your shoulder pain."
Yeah.
Right. And similarly with
even words,
stuff,
even just avoiding words like, "Oh, that's dysfunctional," or that blah blah blah. Like I've learned to avoid those words and just reframe it in a different way, which gets people on board more.
Yeah.
And that's stuff I've learned from her, because it's just like, oh, I never realized I was doing that until she brought it up. So Yeah.
Yeah, and with psychological stuff, you as a coach aren't going to be like, oh, great, like let me fix your eating disorder, right? It's like, yo, don't get involved in that. But if you do have an understanding of some of the concepts that actual psychologists are using to deal with these issues, that you may be able to ask better questions or support someone better, and then have a pretty clear line of like, okay, this is something that I need to refer out for. Like this is outside of my expertise.
Yep.
So I think something else about the social media stuff is a lot of it is for a potential different audience than the way people take it, right? That a lot of the magical thinking and inspirational quotes is stuff that just makes people feel good when they're browsing on Instagram. But then if you're someone who's actually trying to use that as, okay, I'm going to try to work on my issues with this, it's like, that's not for you. That's for someone to just like click a like button. It's not the same thing.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, and that's what I meant by like we put on our rose-colored glasses, because everything on Instagram is hunky-dory and perfect. I remember a couple weeks ago I did a post I wrote about it. I made it an Instagram post first, but then I made it a blog post where I call it the anti-highlight reel, where I actually posted a video of me missing a lift, and like a lift that I've hit numerous times and I missed it, and I was just like, this is a good example of, when you do peruse Instagram, it's always like PR, this, look at this new exercise. And I was like, no, like, it's like I'm a fitness professional. Like I have bad days at the gym too. I do think that's an important message to send. Like you're going to have days that just feel like garbage, and that's fine. Like just go in, get your reps in, and leave, and show up the next day. And again, that is verbiage I've learned from my wife, where, I mean, we can lean into those feelings. That doesn't invalidate you, and it doesn't make you a bad person. It just is what it is. And it shouldn't ruin your day either. It shouldn't own you. So, and I've had many clients who, again, they miss a lift or have a bad session, and they really get down on themselves. And I'm just like, listen, like, it's just a session, not a big deal. We're going to get your reps in, we're going to do some good work, and we're going to leave. So it's just, we don't have to overcomplicate things. It's just simple stuff like that.
For sure. So you mentioned the workshop you run with your wife a few times, and you also mentioned that you're coming to Chicago. Can you give us just like a rundown of what you're actually covering in that workshop?
So it's a strong body, strong mind workshop, and we're doing it as South Loop Strength and Conditioning, which is Todd's gym. I've heard of it. Yeah, you've heard of it. So essentially, it's a full day where Lisa and I unpack both physical and psychological techniques. So she'll spend the bulk of the morning talking about being a more client-centered coaching, where your coaching is more about the client, not about you, and talking about self-determination theory. So how we're building autonomy, how we're building competency, how we're improving one's motivation, and then also talking about tricky clients. So a part of that too is like almost inevitably someone brings up like, I have this one client. And everyone else like, yeah, I have that client too. And then they start talking about it. Like, okay, how we handle this as, you're not a licensed psychologist, but there is skills you can learn here to help with the situation. And then I spend the afternoon where I start talking about the assessment and really, you nailed it earlier. It's like really getting out of the mindset of like, okay, I'm not seeking out dysfunction here. I'm not trying to prove like how broken someone is. Like I want to take this information in so I can write a well-designed program for them. But I break down my upper and lower extremity assessment. And then usually what ends up happening is we might talk about like joint-friendly shoulder training. Usually goes into overhead pressing, but then we start breaking down the deadlift and the squat, and just seeing like how I break those movements down, how I assess them, and then how I repackage them to fit that person. Because even then, like, not everyone's going to conventional deadlift, not everyone's going to sumo deadlift, not everyone's going to back squat. Like, how do we figure that out? Because that is building autonomy and competency with our clients. So that's more or less the full day. So it's both brain stuff and brawn. So I think
a dynamic duo.
Yeah, and to me, like I mean, of course I'm biased, but it is the only workshop of its kind where you have a pretty good strength coach coming in, and a licensed psychologist coming in, a PhD in sports psychology, and you know, she lifts too. So, and that's always nice too. It's like she's a doctor who lifts. So, as the joke goes, but it's a good day, and it is information that I think is valuable to fitness professionals and non-fitness professionals. Like, we get people who are not trainers come in too, because they want to kind of learn how to lift well as well. You know, it's a fun, good day. So it's about half. It's equal parts lecture and hands-on. So it isn't just us talking up there. So we definitely get people moving and, you know, and listening to some stuff, which is fun. But yeah, it's a fun, good day.
Yep, and we'll include sign up links and all that in the show notes.
Yeah,
so
great.
People can check that out.
And we love Chicago, so it'll be a nice time in August, and it's on a Sunday.
We got the bean.
Yeah, so we're looking forward to it.
Yep. And then what about the new shoulder resource you have coming out with Dean Somerset? What is it? The Even More Complete Shoulder and Hip Blueprint?
that was my marketing savvy right there, or lack thereof. So we recorded the Even More Complete Shoulder and Hip Blueprint a few weeks ago in Edmonton, and we're going to be releasing that as a digital product in the coming weeks. So probably late summer, early fall. You know, the first iteration went off really well. People seemed to enjoy it. They learned a lot from it. So he and I came up with some added material and go a little bit more deeper into the program design of things and some new things we learned with hip and shoulder assessment, and how I go into, I mean, speaking overhead mobility, I go into a really deep dive on how I address that, like my 3-layer system as far as how I address overhead mobility. But yeah, we're going to be releasing that in a couple weeks, so we're excited for that. And I hope it makes the industry better. That's kind of why we do it. But yeah, we're looking forward to that as well.
Perfect. And if people want to know about this, is there like an email list or something they could be on?
Yeah, I mean, it'd be my website. So it's TonyGentilcore.com. That's my blog, articles, podcasts, everything. There is a newsletter you can sign up for that I try not to be too aggressive with. I'm certainly not someone that's sending out a newsletter a day. It's usually like one a week, where I do basically a recap of what I wrote that week. But certainly there are times where if I'm sending out a heads up for a Chicago workshop or stuff like that I use a newsletter for. But yeah, they'll definitely get information as far as product releases and stuff like that too.
Thanks for listening all the way through. I admire your grit, your persistence, and your perseverance. Since you made it, I have a few favors to ask of you. Go ahead and open up the show notes on whatever podcast player you use. In there, you'll find links to all the resources that were mentioned throughout the show. There's also some links there in which you can leave a review or subscribe to the show. And podcasters are always harping on this because this actually makes a difference in terms of the algorithms that recommend podcasts to new people. So if you do that, it helps more people find the show. And if you head over to toddneef.com, you can sign up to receive most of my thoughts and writing, which really only go out to the email list. A lot of it never makes it to the blog or the podcast. So if you like what I have to say and you want to see some of my recommendations and stuff that I've been checking out, go ahead and subscribe to that email newsletter as well.